Welcome to the ADNA Presents, the Audio Description Network Alliance. My name is Roy Samuelson, and today we have another guest returning, Petr Kucheryavyy. He is the Audio Description Champion. The actual title is Senior Manager of Charter Accessibility, working with Spectrum Access as well as Outreach. It is so good to have you back, Petr. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. It's such a pleasure to be back on.
What do you love about audio description?
Oh, man. I don't think we have all day to answer that question. But, outside of the obvious, which is giving blind people like myself access to entertainment and on-screen content, I would say still today, my favorite thing about audio description is the artistic nature of everything that goes into creating the audio description, writing it, narrating it from beginning to end. It never ceases to amaze me on the final product just how complex and illustrative the description is. If it's done right, it amuses even my sighted friends and family and peers that have come to enjoy audio description with their content, even though they can see the screen. They've got all kinds of use cases for it. But most of all, we all share the love of the artistic quality.
And that concludes our interview. We have nothing more to say because you just nailed everything that this podcast stands. Thank you. Wow. Let's dive into a little bit on the artistic nature. One of the things that I've loved about seeing what you put out there publicly and also in our conversations and other approaches, specifically with your work at Spectrum. Can we dive into a little bit of why that artistic nature matters as far as the business side goes?
Yeah, I think it's probably important right off the bat to mention that we as a distribution company are not tasked with creating audio description. That's just not our role and the chain of processes that happens around audio description. Our job, which is still a very important one, is to deliver that final product to the consumer on that end. And we'll talk a little bit about how we've sort of innovated there and get back to Spectrum Access. But I think that it's almost difficult to keep my personal life out of the context here when we talk about the artistic nature and its importance, because as a person who relies on audio description for my content, to me, it's not just to me, of course, I don't want to speak on behalf of other people, but I certainly am well in the network of the blind community to know that this is a shared perspective, that if you're watching an incredible piece of content that cost millions of dollars to create, produce, and write and get to a consumer audience, that any description that comes along with that matches that quality so that you're not disconnected between the audio description and the content that you're watching. So, for instance, I'm going to use the famous show C and all the description that came with that. Obviously, there are a lot of blind people that were cast for that, and just a phenomenal piece of content and well produced and directed. But the outcome would have felt very different for a blind audience if the audio description had not matched the quality of the actual on-screen talent and production work that went into that. So to be able to keep in step with that experience, and I'm sure you cover this and talk about this enough, that yes, it's amazing that voice artists have such clarity and great talent that goes into the work that they do. But I think that any voice artist that does description would say to you that it's more important that the end user, the person who's watching the content, doesn't really notice the voice artistry as much because they're so enthralled and it stays in step with the content that it's almost a part of the whole package. And that's why it's important. It's important to understand what the intention is of the movie or show or piece of content that's being described. The writing and the narration have to sort of fit into that seamlessly as if it's an entire package that was just intended to go out together. I think that's probably the thing that stands out to me the most in terms of why the artistry is really important, because if it doesn't focus on the right things, then it just seems to be a mismatch and it lags along and it doesn't do what it needs to do. And for the most part, I've been pleased and pleasantly surprised every time I turn on content these days, just increasingly happier and happier with what I'm hearing.
That's so good to know. Our job as voice talents is to bring that intention to the scene so that we are supporting the story. The performance that we give is to make sure our audiences are immersed and that we're supporting the story. If I'm thinking about how great my voice sounds, it's going to totally get in the way. And you're going to hear that. That intent of listen to how great I am is going to usurp what's happening on screen or the relations between the characters. And that does take the development of skills. And as more voice talents do this work, they are recognizing that nuance. And that is definitely something that we focus on, but not just on the performance side, the voice that you're hearing, but the writing, the timing of when that voice jumps in and jumps out and how loud or soft that voice gets. That those are the other elements that we've also covered. I'm assuming that when it comes to that, understanding that you're not creating it, but as a discerner of quality judgment, removing that discrepancy between what's happening on screen and what you're hearing in the audio description track. As the audio description track becomes part of the story, I'm assuming that you brought this up. The writing, the word choice, the how many words are used also has an impact. Maybe you could address that or the engineering side as far as your experience goes. And then we have to get into your work as well.
Absolutely. So all of it, everything you just mentioned. I mean, I think that it's just incredible to stop and recognize how much effort and skill and how many components to that puzzle exist to make that description good and do the work that it's intending to do. I don't think that a lot of people take the time out of their day to note that first and foremost. So I think, just going through that list and saying, here are all the components that go into making great description is just a really helpful reminder in how important all this work is. But secondly, those of us who remember the days of sitting in a movie theater or even at home and watching the latest, greatest blockbuster picture, and it's a multi-million-dollar production that we then have a family member or friend or partner sit next to us and moan and groan and chop up along the way as they try to describe it to you and speak over the narration and the acting. And to go from that experience, which is notably not great, not ideal at the very least. Occasionally you'll get somebody who's better at it than somebody else, but it's sort of that on the spot, put something together and whisper it in your ear as best as you can, to this well orchestrated description that from the technology to the voice artistry just seamlessly fits in, is a massive leap between in my time, in my history to today. That's really important. And it's really important to recognize that the consumer audience that we want to pay for that content, whether it's in a movie theater or rent it in the house or subscribe to it on their subscription platforms, and to enjoy as an end user, if we want a happy customer, we have to deliver. We have to make sure we deliver that. And for us, we're sort of in this in-between place where we are literally delivering that content, but we're championing good audio description. We have to champion that as well, because the customers oftentimes on the spectrum side of the equation who are subscribing to content, receiving the audio description that we pass through, if something's going wrong, the first entity that they're reaching out to is their spectrum company. They're reaching out to us and they're saying, hey, this is not working, or this is a bad experience, or whatever it is. And so we're mediating that experience relationship between the content and the customer. And so we obviously, on the content side, have the right teams in place that negotiate those relationships, make sure that high quality content is being negotiated into the Spectrum subscription packages and whatnot. Well, as an accessibility team, we want to be that group that negotiates the right relationships for more audio description, good quality audio description, and the kind of platforms or technologies that make that experience better and better.
I love hearing about that mediation, and I'm sorry to hear about that mediation. It's the buck stops here, apparently. I'm hearing a lot of championing of quality and quantity when it comes to audio description. As you know, we've had some challenges with this race to the bottom. As quantity grew, it seemed to be focused on numbers instead of actual experience for our audiences who listen to AD. I'm curious if you can share maybe a specific or two about how specifically your team and you are championing audio description in this role. It sounds like obviously you can give feedback back, as you seem to be the first line, but what kind of proactive steps do you find have been really useful in your role?
First and foremost, I'll mention here that as we think about the ways that we deliver audio description, there's a very traditional model for that. And we certainly by law are not required to move beyond that traditional model currently. But as you know, that really wasn't good enough. And we've got a lot of passion, particularly on our team, to do more. And so that's when we came out with the Spectrum Access app. And I've been really, really fortunate that in the relationships with our studio and network partners for the app, there's been a focus on high quality audio description thus far. I will admit that as we start to have conversations about quantity and getting more audio description, you start to broach the conversation of whether or not there's place for AI generated audio description or TTS voiced audio description. And there have been some successes with that. There have certainly been some shortcomings with that, no doubt. And it's an interesting space to continue to watch. But I personally think that the appetite, particularly for new content, as content is being developed, we're now in the know. We're no longer in history where we're trying to catch up and there's thousands of pieces of content that we want to have described, but who's got the time or resources to do it? And so maybe there's a place somewhere in there for old content to fall into the experimental realm of AI or TTS. And I don't know what the answer there is. I think the higher the quality is, the obviously people are going to want to watch that content. But I think the expectations have been set for new incoming content that we know what good quality means. We've seen it. We've remarked on it. We've offered up awards for it. So as this podcast goes live, it will be after the Audio Description Awards Gala. And so these kinds of institutions exist specifically for that purpose, so that we recognize what high quality, good audio description is and what that work that should be recognized looks like as well. So there's almost no excuse. We can point to these successes and say, this is the recipe for the voice artistry, for the writing, for the timing, for the technology, and the platforms. So this can be replicated over and over again to no end, because we know the content's coming and we can align the timing of the audio description to be created for that, for the theatrical experience, for the in-home experience, and so on. I think that the number of excuses are being reduced in terms of what any entity can say about not creating audio description. And so we try to voice that with our team. We try to voice that to our partners. I've been working really hard in my conversations with our studio network partners to demonstrate that broader value of audio description and creating the audio description, the people love numbers. Roy, I don't know if you've heard this already, but people want to know, well, what are the numbers? How many blind people are there really out there that this affects? And there's two things that I typically champion on that front. One is the numbers are large enough to be impactful to your bottom line, and they can increase revenue. And those statistics and that data is rich and it's out there already. So we've got that as well. And number two, we've seen the success with the launch of closed captioning, astronomical success of closed captioning within the population of people that are not deaf or hard of hearing. I think the statistics still stands today that 80% of people that enjoy closed captioning are not deaf or hard of hearing. As a matter of fact, I was giving an internal presentation to our product group a few weeks ago, and I asked the room to give me some noise if they use closed captioning. And I think with the exception of the two other blind people in the room, everybody made some noise. At least with regard to that room, it was more than 80% that enjoyed that particular type of accessibility content. On the audio description side, I have no doubt that we will see the same kinds of successes, especially, if we're talking about high quality artistic audio description that I've seen droves of people in my own personal life embrace. Then it's no longer a numbers conversation specific to the blind community, but it's a numbers conversation that is more of a universal principle that there are a lot of people that are going to find audio description really helpful, whether or not they have other types of learning disabilities or they have children that have a variety of disabilities that can appreciate that, or It's just the sort of more benign. I'm chopping onions right now when I want to catch up on Hunger Games in the background, so I want the audio description.
I have not heard the onion chopping analogy until just this moment. This is a beautiful analogy. I've heard the driving and the cooking and the cleaning, but specifically onions, that really takes it to a new level.
Well, because you're typically also having some tears involved with the onion, so you
Bingo.
can't see past the tears, right?
Exactly. Yes. And I love that you went into that nuance too. As a voice talent, I see a space for AI, which surprises people. This is not a all or nothing thing. There's some real spaces where audio description can benefit. And it's fascinating to see how polarizing simply by being, oh, it's got to be all audio description with AI or it's got to be none. There's a lot of space for it. And the conversations that are happening with voice talents, I'm not sure if they're being heard. And I also know that voice talents aren't hearing some of the really compelling arguments of how they themselves, the voice talents, can benefit from certain aspects of AI. So I'm glad to hear that this is being broached. And if I may, I'd love to get into a little bit more. Well, let's start with Spectrum Access. For those who might not be aware, if you could do the elevator pitch for Spectrum Access, let's start with that, and then we can dive in a little bit more to your work.
Sure. Spectrum Access is a standalone mobile app that provides free access. And when I say free, I truly mean free from C to C. You don't have to be a Spectrum customer. It's a free app that gives you access to audio description and closed captioning that you can download a track for and synchronize that track with the content that you're watching on your television or in your room. And in effect, the result is you've got, for instance, a movie or show playing on the television, and the audio description, now synchronized, is piping through your own personal device, giving you the ability to either play it out loud for everybody in the room or to be able to consume it more in private by plugging in an earbud or headphones, which distinguishes it remarkably from the traditional means of getting audio description, which sort of forces everybody in the room to hear it. Now, I say forces very liberally here because not everybody is forced to. A lot of people enjoy that, but it sort of gives you that flexibility, also gives you the ability to customize the sound if you have Bluetooth hearing aids. And most recently, Roy, since we've last aired, we've got some new features, and I'm sure we've got a little bit of time here to talk about them. I just want to brush over them really quickly. Braille display support, folks who are deaf-blind being able to consume captions through a Braille display or be able to scroll through them. I know this is an audio description platform, but I think it's notable because we have some now cross-pollination here in this world of the deaf-blind audience that we're wanting to build more and more features for, and captions are part of that equation. So being able to scroll up and down through captions or read them with a Braille display, the ability to search for content. I come from a background of working with aging adults and finding technology solutions for our aging population that may not be as adept at the fast-paced technology half-life that we're experiencing now. So the ability to just use your voice with Siri or Google to search for whether or not that piece of content that you're wanting is on Spectrum Access. You could just use the wake word for your own personal device and then ask, search Spectrum Access, and then name the content that you're looking for. And your device will come back and let you know whether or not Spectrum Access contains that content. And a coming soon feature there is, if it's not, you can submit a request. And we're going to catalog those requests and use that as additional leverage in our conversations with our studio network partners to say, hey, this piece of content is highly requested. We urge you to either create the audio description or share it with us and be able to make some progress that way as well. And then I'm excited about the additional opportunities that the app affords us, like potentially moving this into theatrical space. There are people that have experienced this already with maybe not like brand new, just in theaters content, but stuff that's been out for a little while and has landed in the Spectrum Access app. You can take it into a theater and enjoy it that way. So theoretically, it's possible, but we just need more development to happen on that front so that we can be able to make some progress there as well. And I know we're not in the business of theatrical content as a cable company, as a communication company in the sort of traditional sense, but the app is not traditional. It's certainly not one that we've geared specifically toward our customers only. There's no credentials involved. And so if we've already innovated in a broader sense to benefit the community with audio description, then why not take it to theaters?
So great to hear about all these barriers being removed from the Braille display, yeah, getting into the intersectionality of disability as well as the vocal search. We've got a wish list on the ADNA.org website that has been updated and synced with ACB's list. So we should probably talk a little further about that, making sure that that's getting into your database. But I'm loving what you're saying about the film side. I can't tell how many experiences that AD audiences have had recently where the risk of going to a movie theater and having to talk to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about and giving the wrong headset to gross headsets to the isolation that happens with some of them and just I don't want to touch that. It goes on. And the use case for Spectrum Access in those settings has got to open up so many more doors that it seems like a win-win. So it's great to hear that that's being approached. How about some other directions within your company that you'd like to share with our audience? Maybe something that you could share that is already existing that you're really proud of, or if there is something that you can share that's coming up, or maybe you could tease us, hey, stay tuned for 8 months from now. We've got something really great cooking.
I sort of, with lots of liberty, approach the conversation about theatrical content and that wish list. I don't make any promises because this is a project of passion, one that we are really excited to be able to bring to users' mobile devices. And I can't make a ton of promises about anything, really. But I will say that I'm really excited. It's going to seem a little unrelated, but I want to sort of boast about a new product launch that Charter Spectrum in a joint venture with Comcast has launched, and that's the Zumo box. Essentially, it's an IP box that is akin to any other IP box like Apple TV or others, that Roku and so on, that you might have enjoyed Spectrum TV on. This one, however, is a more in-house type solution that will provide a really elegant experience with the Spectrum Guide. So this is really valuable for somebody who maybe doesn't have a Spectrum set-top box or is looking to replace it with an IP solution. And this will give you that sort of Spectrum Guide experience with some, what I would say some additional wins, some additional features on the accessibility side, including a voice input option on the remote. So right now we're exploring how we can make accessibility a highlight of that Zumo box experience, and whether or not Spectrum Access app has a role that it can play in the way that you access that content or interact with it. Maybe even target some additional disability types that the app has not been able to reach as of yet. And so if we can make some headway there, I would love to rejoin you again and share about that. But that's just sort of a sneak peek at where our future glances are aimed, is maybe making some improvements on that particular platform.
Passionate glances. Everything that you're saying has been aligned with that passion that you as supporting the vision of your company and also you as AD audience member, it seems to be contributing so well. Do you see that alignment with your own experience contributing to the business side in a way that is as satisfying as it sounds? I'm sure there's challenges behind the scenes, but I'm hearing a lot of support in not only your role, but your contribution to the role.
To the extent possible, right? The challenge of not only audio description, but just entertainment in general, is that there is an upstream owner, sort of a midstream owner, and a downstream owner, and some in between, and everybody's got a role to play in the handoff process, and or whether or not there's some sort of block that happens along the way. And so again, we play a small but critical role at the downstream end of that entire process to get that audio description content to our users. But there's no reason why we can't be the salmon that swims upstream and affects some change up there to say like, hey, we're hearing from our customers who we have a very close relationship with. I mean, being downstream, that's our connection point. And for me, in my outreach role, spending time in the community gets me even closer to those who appreciate, enjoy the content, and those who our work affects. So I can take that feedback back to our team, and on the product side be able to affect change. But if we can swim upstream and start knocking on doors and saying, hey, we're hearing it loud on this side, that it would be beneficial to everybody involved if we got together and created some new solutions for audio description or expanded the availability of audio description. And I'll tell you that without naming any names, and I wouldn't be saying anything bad if I did here, but in the conversations that I've had with some of our studio partners and network folks as well, that they, for the most part, the majority of our partners in those groups are already stepping outside of their, we'll call it legal compliant requirements to deliver a certain number of audio described content. There's a lot of enthusiasm to deliver more. For some people, it's a question of resolving the cost end of things. For other people, it's a matter of creating new processes for old legacy systems. For other people, it's who is the judge of quality and where do we go? And there's a lot of questions that are being, I think very fair questions for somebody not familiar that still need to be answered. So I'm very optimistic about the future of audio description, given what I'm hearing. I would say in the minority lie those who say no, unless the government tells us otherwise, this is what we'll do. But by and large, I think we can make huge waves outside of legislative regulatory bodies just to continue to make the case, to build the case, to sing the song, to march the march and say, hey, this is what not only we're hearing, but here are the supporting facts that go along with it, of which there are many now. So we're very fortunate to be at a time when we now have a lot of institutions that have done some research and shown the value of inclusion, including people with disabilities. And for me, a part of that song is also, I'll go back and say this over and over again, that our audience is not just blind or visually impaired. There are other disability types, and then there are those who don't have a disability who are increasingly becoming more and more enthusiastic about audio description with their content. So that entire sort of package, thinking of it as a package, just as we do with closed captioning or have in the past, moving toward that future is exactly where I see things going. And I do see a lot of support around that. I just think that it's going to take some time to answer the questions and resolve some of the challenges that those partners are experiencing.
To hear that approach, there's 3 points that come out so clearly that you distinguished between older versus new content. And when it comes to the package, those are distinguished entities that putting those together really limits the experience for both. And how great to hear about those mandates. Those are necessary and they only go so far. And to hear that these organizations are understanding and buying in to those numbers that don't lie. You had said earlier that whether it's the number of blind people that are watching or not watching, cart before the horse here, of saying, hey, if you build it, they will come. Let's go let's go that direction.
That's right.
It sounds like there's a lot of really great places, and you and your role positioned as a platform to be able to see both the upstream and the downstream to help connect those in a way that it might not be done by others. Oh, boy, this has been such a wonderfully wide-ranging conversation so far. Is there something that you haven't shared yet that you'd like to address with our audience?
I'll say something that's coming to mind as we talk about this, which is that, with the Spectrum Access app, we have a unique opportunity to gather more data for the cause. So the more people that use the Spectrum Access app, the better we are positioned to swim upstream and make that argument, if you will, and collect the kind of data that's going to be really important, because large organizations are data-driven. Certainly we are, and I suspect any other successful company out there, whether they're creating content or own content or license it or whatever, they all work based on data because data produces the outcomes that you want. And so within the Spectrum Access app, we have a unique opportunity moving down the road here, and that is something we're positioning ourselves for the coming year, is to gather better user data. Now, of course, when I say that, there are some ears that perk to say, oh, you're collecting my personal data. That's not at all what I mean. What I mean is sort of more meta level data on how much audio description is being consumed from beginning to end, how many people sort of at a geographic level are interested in the content, so on and so forth. There's just a lot of data points here that we can utilize, whether or not there's the deafblind audience that's enjoying content with the Braille displays, whose content is getting a ton of attention. And of course, with the feedback form that I teased as well, the kind of content that users want but aren't getting. And so I understand that there are a lot of audio description consumers out there that haven't come onto the Spectrum Access app, and fair enough, but I welcome anyone and all to join us there, to consume content there, to just check out and see what the unique sort of delivery method and model is of the Spectrum Access app, and also join us in the effort to build more data, more use cases, and more of that leverage that we can use to go back to these studio network partners and say, this is the kind of information you've been looking for, and we finally got it. There's a ton of demand, there's a ton of interest, and people are flocking toward quality audio description. Maybe there's an opportunity to demonstrate that as well. So there's a lot of ways to slice and dice the pie here, but that's something coming in the upcoming year that I think we'll be able to start moving toward being a little more data-driven on how we build this case.
Oh, how exciting. This is so good to hear the direction that things are going. How can people follow you or your company, social media or websites? I know for the app itself, I believe it's called Enabled Media, Spectrum Access Enabled Media, at least on the iOS.
That's right. Yeah. So if you type in Spectrum Access, you'll see a subtitle there, Enabled Media. You'll know that's the right one. So download that app. It's absolutely free. There's no paywall or credentials or anything like that required. So anybody can download it. I will say anybody in the US. I'm sorry to our Canadian neighbors that have been writing me and others around the world. Currently, we're only able to make the app available in the US, but the good news is it doesn't matter if you're a Spectrum subscriber or not. The content in the app is available to you for free. You can follow the work of the app and our team on social media. We've got a Twitter handle. We're at Spectrum Disability. And I think about a week into our Facebook being live as well. So Spectrum Disability on Facebook. You can give us a follow there and join us. I think we'll be able to, with more character count, be able to expound a little bit more on the work that we're doing and what we're excited about. And then if you've got other Spectrum Access related questions, you can email me at spectrumaccess@charter.com.
Oh, thanks so much for this, Peter. It's so great to have you join us.